if you only take out the bottom, can you still see your applications behind it and then scroll through it?
Oh, good question. No. So if the UI window only takes up the top half of the screen, could you secretly see your Springboard and all of your applications and your email account? No. I think you would just see gray or white. Good question. Or black even. Good question. I'm sure we could answer that. Yeah. Easy test, though. Yeah.
Could you technically say UI screen dot main screen dot bounds if those were properties?
If they were properties, and I don't believe they are, simply because Apple decided that they are not. Could be wrong, and we could quickly check the documentation for the UI screen class. But yes, if they were properties, you could do that. Other questions? All right, so what's next? Self.window.rootViewController. All right, so this is another convention here. So recall that I am inheriting from the UI view controller class. That's, again, a special class that Apple wrote that gives me a bunch of stuff for free, screen rotations and other functionality. Now, if I'm going to use that, the documentation says that I have to inform this UI view controller of its default root view controller. So in other words, I need to tell the window, let me back up. The window object is who needs to know who the default controller is. So just as main passes off control to the app delegate is going to pass off control to a controller. Who is the default controller? The first one you see that gets control? Well, it's whoever is the value of root view controller. So the window has a special property, which is a pointer to a view controller, and that's just the default one. In my purple application, there's only one, so there's no complexity here, but surely with more interesting applications like the Mail app, you might have multiple controllers, each do different things. You at least need a default. It's probably the inbox. In that case, is the default view controller, so the root view controller. So self.window.rootViewController gets self.viewController. Now notice you can nest properties in this way. If you call something.something.something, totally legitimate, but just realize you're invoking most likely synthesized getters or setters in this case. All right, lastly, this line tells the window, make yourself the key window and visible. Key window essentially means you're the one that responds to finger touches, and visible means show yourself. And then we return yes, signifying the application did finish loading with options. Launching with options. Yeah?
So if you didn't do that, your application would show, but it wouldn't respond to it.
Well, let's see. So which, if you didn't do that, define that.
You didn't do this self window and make key and visible.
So this one here?
Not those two, just the bottom one.
Oh, just this one.
Yeah. Our application doesn't do anything, so.
Indeed, now it does even less, right? So that's what it does. So, and admittedly, for time's sake, I'm not testing all of our questions sometimes, but this is absolutely good practice. Like when in doubt, just try it. Save your work, but certainly try it. Good question. All right, so what else is in this file? Well, thankfully, a whole bunch of stuff we're going to delete in a second, but just so you know where some of the magical behavior is coming from, notice that the UI app delegate class that we're descending from also has some other methods. Application will resign active, and the comments essentially define this, but now there's backgrounding apps in iOS whereby you hit the home button and then the thing disappears. You have the ability to respond to those events. So just as JavaScript is very much an event-oriented language, so is Objective-C in this case, so you can do something there. Did enter background after that has actually happened. Application will enter foreground right before it comes back up. So there might be things you want to do, like the Mail app. You don't want it checking your mail in the background necessarily, but the moment I re-click the icon and bring it back, maybe Apple wants it, just then recheck the mail server for efficiency. So you have this ability to respond to these events. Application will terminate here too. If the user is trying to force quit your application, you have the ability, or rather, if you're trying to quit the application, you have the ability to intervene at the last second. But there are constraints. If you kind of try biding your time and spend 30 seconds doing something, cleaning something up, you're going to get killed by the OS. You have, I think, 5 seconds maximally, and that's actually a little high. So this is not meant for long-winded operations. This is for super simple cleanup, like quickly save the high scores or quickly update the settings or something simple like that. But for now, I can delete all of that so that now my application is whittled down to relatively few lines of code. So what you'll see in the printout here today and on the website, the application I called single view is literally the result of my creating this template, then ripping out everything that you don't need to care about initially. So if you want, you can reread through that code just to focus on the germane things. But if you start with the fresh template, you'll get a lot more detail. Any questions? Yeah, Zach.
So what's the relationship between the nib file and the .m file? Because I think sometimes in like IDEs they'll like create the code for like the things you put in the nib or like in the view in the code.
Good question.
Does that all live in the nib file?
Good question. What's the relationship between the nib file and the .m file? Short answer is it depends on the template and on your own design decisions. Generally, the nib contains your user interface or a subset thereof. And by user interface, I mean where are the buttons, where are the text fields, where are the scroll bars and the like. All of that, though, can be implemented in code, and you can delete the nib file and do all of that in code. Some of the templates, even that Apple provides, do all nib-based UI, or they do all code-based UI, or an amalgam of the two. It really depends. And this is slightly one of these religious things where some people just hate using interface builder. Interface builder is just the jargon that refers to the drag-and-drop interface inside of Xcode. It used to be a separate program years ago. Some people prefer all code. I think, frankly, sometimes it's just easier to start doing it with interface builder and then do a few tweaks in code, but it's a design decision.
But you can go into the .m file and like change variable, like change the label.
Yes, oh absolutely. If you drag and drop things into the nib file, you can then programmatically change what you did in code. They're not mutually exclusive, but the nib is typically loaded first. Good question. You can think of it, the nib is technically supposed to be a serialized object. So if you think of your user interface as an object in memory, the nib file, even though it's XML, is like the result of converting it to a crazy long cryptic string so that you can unserialize it later and reconstruct that same user interface. All right, so let's make this ATM, and we get to introduce the event handling model of iOS and something called actions and outlets. All right, so here we go. I'm going to go to, oh, and do be careful, like I just screwed up. If you hit Command-N for new, it asks you to choose a template for a file. That's not what I want. Command-Shift-New gives me a new project. Or if that's confusing, just go to the File menu and make sure you explicitly choose New Project, not New File. And then you'll get the right templates. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start with a single view application because it'll give me a little functionality like rotation and whatnot. I'm going to call this ATM. I'm going to leave all of that checked as before. Click OK, or rather Next. Put it on my desktop for now. And here we go. Back to the same starting point that we had before. So I want to implement an ATM, and you saw a glimpse at the interface earlier. So let's dive right into the interface and then worry about how to implement the model and the controller itself after that. So I'm going to go into my nib file. So on the left-hand side here, I have viewcontroller.nib. I just have one nib. That's fine, because I'm going to have one interface. So let's do some fluffy stuff first. Let me click on the background here. Let me change the background from being gray to white. All right, so now it looks a little less boring, or maybe more boring, depending on your perspective. Now let me start laying some things out, and I'll try to zoom in and out as needed to make this clear as to what I'm doing. So I first want a label. I kind of modeled this in my head after like an old school calculator with the little readout on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop a label at the top of the file there, and I'm going to say this is where the amount is going to go. That's just a placeholder. It's going to become numeric, but just to keep myself sane, I'll do that for now. Let me increase the font size to, let's say, 24 there. And let me just drag here. So kind of like Photoshop and InDesign, if familiar with those products, you can drag, and then it kind of has guidelines to just propose. Why don't you let go there so it's not too close to the edge of the glass so a human finger can still interact with it okay. I'm going to go ahead then and center it here, rather right align it like a calculator would be, or an ATM in this case. So now I have my text field. Now we're going to see in a moment how I can programmatically edit the contents of that string from being amount to being like $0 or something like that. But now let's do some buttons for the mechanics of the thing. So I'm going to drag and drop this button here. It's suggesting where I put it, but I can override this if I want. And I can absolutely make these things prettier. You can add skins these days and gradients and even graphics and the like, but we'll just keep it more focused on code for now. This is going to be the number 9 over there. I'm going to just copy and paste this and drag it onto the other side. This will be 7 over there. Copy and paste this. Notice it's figuring out the centering for me, so that's nice. This is the kind of stuff that UI Builder, Interface Builder just makes easier. But you could do this all in code. But now I want to do something else. This is slightly This is some forethought here. So I'm scrolling, because I never remember where it is. And there it is. So it turns out that the thing I just dragged here, the number 7, let me go up to the identity. This is the identity inspector up here. Notice that because I've clicked on the button and I've chosen that inspector, it's telling me what class this little widget is. So I dragged and dropped this button. That's a specific type. It's a UI button. That happens to descend, I know, from the documentation from UI view. And this is only to say that because it's a UI view, it's got some standard information inside of it, besides font size and all this fluffy stuff. One of those details is something called a tag. So I'm actually going to specify, I want this